Hello and welcome to this webinar. I'm John Ward and I'm a comic creator who uses crowdfunding to support my work. I've run several successful crowdfunding campaigns and contributed to a few others, some successful and some not. I wanted to create a brief webinar to help other creators use crowdfunding to launch and support their own creative projects. So if you're new to crowdfunding and want a crash course in some key evidence-informed concepts, then this is the webinar for you. Before we start, I want to acknowledge that this work was created on the ancestral, traditional, and unceded territories of the Coast Salish peoples, specifically the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh nations. Here's the outline for today's webinar. I want to break things into 3 sections for simplicity: before you launch, planning your launch, and during your campaign. Before we dive in, I want to focus on why creators should think about crowdfunding in the first place. The traditional model is that creators make something, then they sell or license it to a third party, and then that party produces and or distributes the creation to the public. For example, if you're a comic book creator, you might make a book and then pitch it to a publisher who can print and distribute the book to stores. The benefits of this model are obvious. The creator really only has to focus on the creation part, and they don't need to have as much focus on the business. Moreover, distribution is typically mature enough to reach a relatively large audience, so think of a book being sold in the bookstore or a movie being shown in movie theaters. Of course, the downside is that everything is predicated on you handing your work to other entities, and this is where the traditional model is arguably broken. Creative industries are increasingly risk averse, and the low signal to noise ratio means that it's harder than ever for creators to stand out. Worse, even if creators do manage to sign a contract for their work, it's actually difficult to make a living. You'll almost always be paid last before other interested parties, and although contracts will frequently try to lure you in with promises of lucrative back-end deals, these really only pay out for the top 1% of the 1% of creators. Most of us will end up with royalties that are vanishingly small, or we end up with nothing at all. This is why crowdfunding is an important consideration. It's more work for creators because they're responsible for the creation and production of their work, but that also means you can keep 100% of the profits. It allows you to find and connect with an audience and doesn't preclude you from going the traditional route at a later date. There are 2 misconceptions to clear up about crowdfunding. First is that crowdfunding is not the same as retail. Although they are similar in some ways, crowdfunding induces a more complex relationship between creator and backer, which is important to be aware of. Second is that crowdfunding is not begging. You are not panhandling, you are seeking investors to help bring your creation to life. So here we go. This is section 1. What are the key considerations you need to be aware of before you launch? First, you need to pick a platform. There are many different reward-based crowdfunding platforms out there, with Kickstarter being the largest. But there are pros and cons to each of the different platforms, and it's important for you to check them out before you launch. Questions to ask yourself can include: are there similar products on the platform? How many backers do those projects get? How many are hitting their targets? And how much does each platform charge you in fees? Part of your homework here should be to back other projects on these platforms. This is important because it teaches you how things work from a backer's perspective, so you can see what works and what doesn't, and you can use that to inform your own launch. But just as importantly, backing other projects is actually a signal from future backers when they check out your campaign. Crowdfunding is communal, and people like to see others participating in the community. In fact, research shows that your chances of successfully launching a crowdfunding campaign will be significantly increased if backers can see that you've backed other campaigns. While you're doing this, you need to be building your own audience and prepping them for launch. You may have an email list for a newsletter or an audience on social media, but it's critical to get the word out about your project to as many people as possible. Crowdfunding platforms will certainly make your project visible to others, but if you can't bring in at least some backers yourself, you may struggle to find success. If you don't have much of an audience, then growing this should be job number 1 before you think about launching. Now we move to the planning phase. So when building your page, it's helpful to show as many images as you can. Much of the research evidence shows a statistically significant association between the number and type of images and crowdfunding success. For some products, that's easier said than done. While comic creators can showcase multiple completed pages of their book, fiction writers may only have a cover. Despite this, it's important to use imagery on your page that evokes the tone, style, and even theme of the product. Similarly, making a video can be helpful, particularly for those creators with a few images to share, as it helps potential backers to learn more about you and your vision. It helps create trust, which is a key enabler of success. And don't forget to showcase other people involved in the project. Also, don't be overly positive when writing your story section. You need to be positive, but being overly positive can create a negative reaction for potential backers. The systematic review referenced here is a good source of evidence for these and other campaign page attributes that are associated with campaign success. So when considering rewards, there are many factors that can be beneficial. The ones identified here are to include a mix of digital and physical rewards if possible, and include images for every reward. You should also bundle your rewards so that each subsequent tier includes the rewards from the previous tier. This further enables you to set a range of price points for each reward tier, which is an optimal approach. The two papers referenced here have more details on the specifics that are worth exploring if you have time. A common and critical question is, what should your campaign goal be? In reality, this question is actually two questions. First, what's the absolute minimum you need to raise to actually make and ship the product? Second, how much do you theoretically think you can raise based on your existing audience size and your comfort level with marketing? Now, if you set a low goal, you're more likely to hit your target, and while setting a high goal is a much riskier proposition. However, there are strong backer herding behavior effects that are present in crowdfunding which you should be aware of. While you may hit a low goal easily, the total amount of funding you end up raising may be significantly smaller than the amount you could have raised if you'd set a higher initial goal. This is because herding behavior increases as you close in on your goal and drops off once you've hit your target. Thus, if you have a low goal, herding behavior can rapidly push the campaign to be funded, but then this momentum dies away as there are fewer incentives to drive the herding behavior. Conversely, if your goal is much higher, herding occurs over a longer period of time, which can lead to a much higher total funding for creators. How long should your campaign be? That's up to you. But here we'll review some pros and cons to a longer campaign. You'll have more time to promote your project, more time to raise funds, and more time to course correct if there are problems. However, the dead zone is longer, promotion can be tiring, and you need to keep backers engaged, otherwise they may cancel their pledges. Now, a shorter campaign has a shorter dead zone and is much easier to keep backers engaged, but you do have less time to raise funds, promote the campaign, and course correct if it's going wrong. So the choice about how long your campaign is ultimately up to you. If you're new to crowdfunding, it's always safer to go with a longer campaign. However, you should think carefully about what day you launch. Launching on weekends and Mondays has been shown to have an adverse effect on campaign success. Launches on Tuesdays are most likely to succeed. When you end the campaign, it's useful to pick a specific time and try to end on a Friday. This is the optimal day to end a campaign that started on a weekday and is likely due to the fact that people are often paid on Fridays. Don't end your campaign on a weekend unless you also launched it on a weekend. Weekend launches and ends that have relatively high success rates, as do Tuesday launches and Friday endings. Finally, you'll often be able to launch a pre-launch page for your campaign. Now, this is your first marketing page and you need to share it as widely as you can. That means getting in front of your existing audience, but also finding ways to get in front of other audiences through interviews, reviews, podcasts, interviews, etc. The more you can promote your pre-launch campaign, the more followers you get, and that increases your chances of success. So now we're going to take a look at what you can do after you've pushed launch on your campaign. Do you just sit back and wait for the pledges to come in? Absolutely not. Your launch day is critical, as this is the day where you get the largest number of backers and typically raise a lot of your funding. It's tempting to sit there and refresh the page every few seconds to see if new backers have pledged, but this is really not healthy for you. Instead, focus on messaging by telling your audiences that the campaign's live, engage in comment with your backers, and try to publicly thank them if you can. The more comments you can make in the first few days, the more likely you are to succeed. You need to keep this messaging going through the first couple of days of your campaign. The above figure should help explain why. The first few days of the campaign are the launch phase. Here you'll raise most of your total funding. After this phase, the campaign moves into the dead zone, where you'll get a few daily backers, but the total volume of funding drops to a much lower level. In fact, as backers drop pledges, you may even have negative funding days in the dead zone. As the campaign reaches its conclusion, you'll likely see an uptick in backers and funding again. There are two major reasons for this. First is that people realize that it's their last chance to back the campaign before it's done, and the second is that people will back the campaign just to help it over the line. This is an altruistic motive that has been identified in the research literature. The overall funding is a flattened S-curve, which is steepest soon after launch, so this phase is really important to focus on. To illustrate this further, here's some data from 3 of my past campaigns, which are all around 30 days. The horizontal axis shows the number of campaign days, while the vertical axis shows the percent of total funding raised by the campaign. So note that the total funding is typically higher than the campaign goal. What this figure shows is that my campaigns received 50% of the total funds raised within the first few days of the campaign. Now this is a similar figure but for shorter campaigns, but you can again see the 50% line is crossed within the first 2 days of the campaigns. So for longer campaigns, the 50% threshold occurs around 5 days, while for shorter campaigns it's around 2 or 3 days. Now if I normalize the data to ensure all the campaign lengths can be treated equally, I find the threshold is reached when the campaign hits 16% of its total length. So what does this matter? It gives you a benchmark of how well your campaign is doing at a very early stage. The above example shows that for a 20-day campaign, we should hit $500 after 3.2 days. So if we're below this threshold, then we need to do something drastic to bring in more backers in order to course correct. If we're far below this threshold, then we may want to consider cancelling the campaign. So what can you do during the dead zone or to course correct? For some products, such as comics, there are already active communities of creators and backers, and you can often share update swaps with other creators who have a live campaign. This ensures your message can reach a new audience and perhaps garner more backers. But this tactic may not work for other categories such as fiction, where the community is less mature. Throughout the campaign, it's important to update backers, ask for comments, and even launch backer-only rewards or contests. There's evidence to indicate that more comments and updates are associated with a higher likelihood of success, so you want to keep people excited about your work through clear and constant communication. If your campaign has reached its goal, it may naturally slow down, so use stretch goals or freebies as a way to incentivize new backers to join the campaign. As the campaign winds down towards the deadline, it's important to keep promoting it where you can, but also to remind potential backers that this is their last chance to back. And all of a sudden, it's over. Hopefully your project funded and now you can put your feet up and relax a little. It's always good to update backers about what comes next, but it's important to take some time and relax. While the campaign phase is done, you now move into fulfillment, which can be just as fraught and stressful, and we'll dig into that in a future webinar. So thank you for watching. You can find me at either of the sites listed here, and you can fill out a short survey about the webinar using the QR code. See you next time.